Welcome everyone to our conversation today with Tracie D. Hall, Executive Director of the American Library Association. But before we get started, I want to start with our land acknowledgement statement. The City of Toronto, including all 100 branches of Toronto Public Library, are situated on Indigenous land and Dish with One Spoon territory. This is the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Wendat, and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. Toronto Public Library gratefully acknowledges these Indigenous nations for their guardianship of this land. So a quick note before we get started with our special guest. We have built in some time for questions and answers at the end of the session today. So if you do have questions and you are remote, I'd encourage all of you to enter them into the Q&A section alongside the right-hand side of your screen. And I'd like to say we're really excited about today's event for so many reasons, but we're thrilled. We've got a full house here, but we have 556 people registered online, which is really exciting. So welcome to all of you. I'd also like to take a moment to acknowledge the TPL Foundation. This year's year-long Intellectual Freedom series of programming wouldn't be possible without the generous donation of an anonymous donor. So I just want to recognize the support of our foundation in making all of this possible. So even though Tracie needs absolutely no introduction, I'd like to start by introducing our guest today. And as we all know, Tracie D. Hall is Executive Director of the American Library Association. She previously served as Director of Culture, the Culture Program at Chicago's Joyce Foundation, and Deputy Commissioner of the Department of Cultural Affairs and Special Events for the City of Chicago. Prior to that, she served as Vice President of Strategy and Organizational Development at Queens Library in New York City, one of the nation's busiest, serving over 11 million users annually. And Tracie's also a poet, a fiction writer, and a playwright, and she is a Cave Canaan Fellow, and the recipient of various awards and residencies for her writing, creative, and community work. She holds degrees from the University of California, Yale University, and the University of Washington, and was born and mainly raised in South Los Angeles. So, Tracie, I'm going to start things off by congratulating you on being named the Time Magazine's 100 Most Influential People in 2023. And I'd like to, just ask you what you thought about this and what it means for librarians and libraries when you consider the fact that other people were named were Pedro Pascal and Salman Rushdie and King Charles and then Tracie D. Hall. So tell us a little bit about that.
Well, first of all, I'm sitting here with Vickery. I'm so excited. You are one of the library leaders that I hold in highest esteem.
Oh, thank you.
And I'm sitting here also in arguably one of the greatest libraries, certainly in North America, but I believe in the world. Mm-hmm. So this is my honor. It really is. So, I think that any award is really not a spotlight, it's more a mirror, right? Mm-hmm, it's a reflection of what's happening at the time, and also I think a reflection of the company that you keep. And I keep company with librarians, mm-hmm. and so I knew that recognition was really, I think, Time and all of the journalists who make those recommendations, they're understanding that we are in a period where not only intellectual freedom, is I think we're having a conversation about our democracy and an existential one, which is why the First Amendment right, mm-hmm. right, which is in the U.S., part of that is freedom of speech and freedom of the press and freedom of expression and the right to read, that's under attack, but also libraries as the guarantor. Yes. Right, mm-hmm. of that access are also under attack. So I think it was that recognition, and I knew the gravity of that, and that Time and the journalists who recommended me and all of us collectively, that they recognize that too. Just I think gave me a lot more fuel to keep pushing.
Yeah, that's fabulous. Anyway, congratulations again.
Thank you.
So, within that context, how do you think the current political and social climate in the U.S. has impacted the concept of intellectual freedom? And certainly that's impacting us here in Canada, but I know it's really powerfully impacted in the United States.
Yeah, it's a global conversation for sure.
Yeah.
It is a global conversation for sure, and I'm really grateful. I think that Toronto Public Library and other libraries that I watch in Canada, are also stepping up. I got a tour of your book sanctuary, a concept that began at the Chicago Public Library, but is perfectly executed here. We were able to see everything from Midnight's Children by Salman Rushdie to the Holy Bible.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And just a reminder, too, that the right of assembly and freedom of religion are also protected under those same First Amendment rights. So we have to think about that holistically. But I think that what's happening in the U.S. is not new, right? We're on the third, I think, wave of censorship at this level. The first, of course, which should be a cautionary tale, was Senator Joseph McCarthy in the 40s and through the 50s, who was responsible for the banning and burning of more than 30,000 books and placing authors on the witness stand on trial. And I think, again, many of us in the 90s and early 2000s, we saw, again, the culture wars happening, especially in the creative arts, creative expression, theater, but also in terms of books. And I think now what we're seeing is, I think, a trifecta, right? Is that we're seeing all of those things happen, but I think that we're like riding a wave of anti-intellectualism. Right. That continues to now. I think that we have to see that as sort of the antecedents. But I think what is dangerous for me, especially right now, is that I believe that censorship is actually a Trojan horse, right, for the removal or endangerment of a lot of other constitutional rights. And I also believe what's really dangerous is that the people who are banning the books are not reading any of the books.
No.
Right? So, this is a lot of copy and pasting of people being radicalized, right? Into banning books. And also sort of, I think that there's this idea that if you want to be, a good citizen, that you'll be roped into banning books. And so I think we have to take that narrative back. And I think, lastly, when I think about sort of what is also happening here is that we are less than 250 years away, or more than 250, which is a little bit more than 250 years away from the founding of the U.S. And foundational to that was the establishment, of course, of the public library, a move from like paid and subscription libraries to the free public library. And I think it's so important for us on our watch that we don't see that erode in less than 250 years. Because again, that is the basis, that civic access, the civic literacy that the library, the school and the public library provide. We can afford to see that eroded. And yet, I think at the end of this, that is what the design is. That is where some of this is leading to. A lot of the legislation that is seeking to ban books, if you look in those same states, there's also pending legislation that is defunding libraries.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's one of the differences between Canada and the United States, at this point anyway, is that in the United States it's become so much more politicized, where governments are taking action to ban books, whereas here we haven't experienced that yet. And we are seeing, though, certainly individual groups, and we don't have Mothers of Liberty here, but there are similar groups in Canada that are pushing for the banning of books targeting LGBTQ content as well as racialized content as well, which is also really significant, isn't it? Yeah, that targeting. So what do you think that libraries can do to effectively address some of these intellectual freedom challenges that they're all facing?
Well, one is that we have to tell our story.
Yes.
I mean, I think that libraries have come to a place, and it's hard to say that because, again, I've been walking around the reference library here all morning, and I've been seeing everybody just engrossed in learning and reading and all of that. But I do believe that we're at a place now that's too many people take libraries for granted. I travel a lot for work, and I get on the plane and I'll sit next to someone, and first thing they want to know is, what do you do?
Yeah.
And, I always just say I'm a librarian.
Yeah.
Oh, you're a librarian? Don't you think libraries are going away?
Yeah. We've all heard
And
that.
I always want to say, I think your industry might go away before libraries do.
Yeah, that's
But I
right.
don't say that.
No.
I don't say that. I think it, but I don't say it. But the reason why I bring that up is because I do think that some of the usership of maybe your traditional community library might be now very much classed, because I think what we see is that the super users of libraries, the people who might use a library at least one, but sometimes 5 times a week, also are people who are using it because they need access to education, they need access to employment, access to public health, access to community-based information that they may not have otherwise. And they tend sometimes to be lower income or striving or raising young families or older people who are trying to stay connected, workers, learners, that kind of thing. And sometimes I think the people who there's sometimes a growing divide that people just don't see. What I said to someone who asked me, don't you think libraries are going away? I said, just like you and I got to the airport, at least an hour, if not earlier, and to make sure we were on this flight. When you think about libraries at Queens, so many times when I'd be walking into Queens Library, Seattle Public Library, libraries I've worked, I would sometimes stand, if I could, in the crowd, listening and with people who were waiting sometimes an hour and a half before we opened. And so what I said is that for people who need to use the library, it is important for them to be there in that line, in that queue, to get into the library as it is for us to get here or to wherever we're going. And I just think that that's important because unfortunately not enough people see that, the urgency, right? And also too, there's like more of a class divide than I think we like to talk about. So the people who think that they can sort of online purchase their way into all books and they need, okay, that's great. But most of us need access to a library, a school, public, or academic library in order to be able to keep up and to realize some of the goals and the dreams that we have for ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you talk about marginalized communities and how important the library is to those marginalized communities. So in thinking about intellectual freedom and equity issues, how do libraries deal with the challenges to intellectual freedom and the, making the library a welcoming and inclusive space for all, kind of dealing with the equity issue as well?
Yeah. Well, I always repeat something that, I think you say frequently, Vickery, is that equity, diversity, inclusion, and intellectual freedom, they have to be, and foundationally, they are mutually reinforcing principles, right?
Right.
So I think that, they are two trains headed in the same direction.
Right.
And, in many cases, especially if you think about, let's go back to the kinds of books that were being banned under McCarthy. A lot of those books were also books that talked about the access of people of color, economic access, like banning Du Bois, right?
Yes.
Du Bois, who was talking a lot about Black people and intellectual access and economic access, or even people like Langston Hughes, who was talking a lot about the average worker and just be simple, and how the average worker needed to self-educate and be enlightened, not only to be productive, but also to be able to have access to some mobility. Or if you think about other books that were being banned, like Civil Disobedience, which was foundationally talking about the right to protest and the fact that every good citizen must hold their government accountable.
Right.
So those are the kinds of, so I think that, one thing I want to go back to is I think it's important for us to remind legislators and lawmakers, philanthropists and influencers today, like people we would have said were civic stewards in the past, to remind them of the import of the library.
Yes.
I think that we have to raise our voice a lot louder. But I also think we have to talk about the ways in which you really can't have equity, diversity, and inclusion in any society unless you have freedom of expression and intellectual freedom. I was just in Little Rock, Arkansas, and I've been asked to come and speak in Little Rock, Arkansas, because the state of Arkansas banned Black studies or African American studies, across the state as an AP course. And we're also talking about this is this is the space where the Little Rock Nine would desegregate Central High. To have those two things happen in the same geography is perplexing to a lot of people. But I think that Little Rock has shown, and I think will continue to show, that you really can't have desegregation if you are you can't desegregate unless you are also desegregating information access. So I think that is like just one geography that reminds us you can't have one without the other.
Right. Oh, that's wonderful. That's so well said. And one of the things too, I mean, you talk about the McCarthy era, which is, you know, really similar to what we're experiencing right now.
Absolutely.
But one of the difference, of course, is technology and social media and the internet. So could you just talk a little bit about how you feel social media and the internet technology has changed what we're experiencing right now?
Yeah, that's a really great question because it's changed what we're experiencing in many ways. One is that I think, you know, technology is an accelerant in general, right? So, you know, whereas before bills and legislation, you know, people would have time, they would need to study them when they came out and see what they could scale or replicate or push back on. You know, today you can just cut and paste, right?
Right.
So you just see across the country cut and paste legislation when it comes to intellectual freedom, and especially censorship. I mean, the same language. It's almost as if someone is just taking one state out and popping the other state in. But I also think if we use it well, now let's talk about where we are in this moment. Most people in the U.S., and I believe across the world, really think that censorship is egregious and think that book banning should never happen. Right. We've polled the American Library Association, we've surveyed, we've hired pollsters to survey the American population, and we see that there is very little difference, even amongst political parties. People believe that free people should read freely, right? Right. All right? But what we're finding is that we have a very organized, especially using the internet, and very vocal minority that is saying otherwise. And that is being, in many ways, as I've said, I think radicalized because people aren't reading the books. I go to a lot of hearings, I listen, you know, online, okay, this is, and I read every article that I can, and you have people saying, I didn't read the book, but I don't think it should be taught. So it's not about the book, let's be honest.
No, that's right.
What it is about people who are uninformed, being asked to suppress freedoms, and we see that all over the world in different spaces. So I think one thing that technology is doing is that it is allowing a vocal minority to find each other and to spread their doctrine. What we really have, though, is a silent majority that is going to need to use the technology as well to find each other and to step up for intellectual freedom and to step up for libraries increasingly, because, you know, the intersection there is really great. So, you know, I'm thinking about Grandparents for Truth, a group of grandparents in the United States that have organized. And I love that because I loved my grandparents. My grandmother introduced me to library. She was the one who made sure I got my first library card at Los Angeles Public Library. And when I saw that, you know, Grandparents for Truth, of course, using these names like Truth, you know, and, you know, you have the opposing group using Liberty, I think misusing it. But when we think about, I think grandparents' power, you know, I'm so happy because also it's like grandparents using technology.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah.
To organize, good. That's what I'm here for that. And I want to see more. Like, you know, don't let your grandparents show you up.
No,
right?
That's right. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, I haven't heard of them. I'm going to look them up. They sound fabulous.
Yeah,
that's wonderful. So in terms of the climate we're all experiencing, certainly as a profession, as librarians, especially in the United States where there's defunding and librarians are losing their jobs and being attacked personally, are you seeing or observing any kind of self-censorship that's going on with librarians in the selection of materials for their collections?
Yeah, exactly. Shadow banning, right? So first of all, thank you for bringing that up because I think, you know, I've heard too many people say, well, isn't, you know, really honestly, isn't banning great in some ways? Doesn't it push these book sales up really high for authors? And I'm like, yeah, for published authors, you know, for books, sometimes, you know, things can become sensational and everybody wants to see why a book is being banned. But let's, you know, look at the long view. The long view is that we are hearing librarians, really ask themselves, do they want to invite controversy?
Right.
People who uphold intellectual freedom, right? But are thinking about the damage that could be done to their library or the controversy that could be caused in their community or any way that they might hurt funding for their library. So absolutely, what we see is people having to make hard choices.
Yeah.
And to be honest, with ALA, our Office of Intellectual Freedom, we have the Leroy Merritt Legal Defense Fund for librarians who and library workers whose jobs might be compromised because of their defense of intellectual freedom or equity, diversity, inclusion, or any areas in which they might be advocating for the public. And that fund has been extinguished so many times and had to be replenished because there are so many library workers, even library trustees who are having to stand down or who, feel a lot of fear about standing up for titles. Some of these titles these are classics, right?
Yeah,
we're talking about some of the greatest works of literature and that are being banned. So shadow banning is happening, and recently I got an email from an 11th grader, and I'm not going to get emotional, but because children and grandparents, right?
Yeah.
But he said, Ms. Hall, do you think you can talk to me, because some of the books that are banned in our state are books that we need to be able to read for our college entrance exams. And I'm afraid that if we can't get them from our school library, I might not be able to get them at all. Now he's my family's from the South, right? And he's from a rural community.
Yeah.
And that for me, think about it. He's asking him, he wants to go to college. This is somebody who found my email and wrote to me. And so he has a lot of moxie and initiative. This is somebody, obviously, who cares a lot about learning, but is wondering whether or not his college entrance is going to be compromised because he can't access some of the books that are canonical, that are a part of the American canon, that will surely be on the college entrance exam. That's how serious this has gotten.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, the smaller libraries is something that we do think about as well.
Yes.
Because, large library systems, medium sized library systems, they have the resources and the capacity often to deal with the challenges. But it's those small library systems that have limited budgets, limited personnel, and expertise in these areas sometimes as well, that it's really challenging for them. So it's really good to hear you talk about this 11-year-old and the impact. It's not just, 11th grader. It's not just the fact that he can't access books, certain books, it's that they're going to affect his future.
And let's think about it, so like if over 80% of libraries in the U.S. are in small and rural communities, right? Where people know each other, right? You don't have the anonymity sometimes that you might have in a bigger city, so you feel sometimes an onus to kind of fit in, right? Or else you might have to experience a certain type of social isolation, right? That it's hard to come back from, or economic isolation. You might lose a job and not be able to find one in a smaller community. So let's think about what people are up against, but let's also think about the larger learning ecosystem. Many of the communities that we're talking about don't have alternative access points. We have seen the disappearance of the small and independent bookstore.
Yes,
right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's not like this young person writing me is really saying, the library is my only access point.
Right.
And if the library doesn't cover it or have it, then I might not be able to get it. And these are not people that we're talking about, the average person's not going to be able to buy online and have delivered to them 20, 30, 40 books a year. It's just not going to happen. So I think the gravity of that hit me, and I think when we think about banning and shadow banning, right, I think we have to think about who it impacts and the fact that it not only reverberates, but it's exponential in terms of impact.
So what do you think libraries can do to help educate their communities about intellectual freedom? I mean, to many people, I think it's just they either take it for granted or they don't really understand the impact of it all. And so what can libraries do to help with their communities in understanding what it all means and how it undermines democratic values?
Yes. Well, what you're doing today and what you have been doing, I think with the series that you're starting is important. You have your staff, you have the regional community that can listen, you have stewards, all, a part of the conversation you and I, are going to be having, over the course of the day. And then also you have the book sanctuary. You're educating people. People are going to be surprised about, first of all, the book curation at TPL is just extraordinary. And I used to do collection development, so I can have like a high standard, and that's the first thing I look at. Is what's being offered and what are people co-locating, right? So that we can, as Ranganathan said, save the time of the user. Make sure that everyone has not only access to the thing they're looking for, but the thing adjacent to the thing that they're looking for and the thing adjacent to that, because that's how we build bodies of knowledge, right?
Right.
And so you're really doing that. But I think we need to build that body of knowledge. What we know about intellectual freedom is that right now we think in the U.S., the American Library Association, we think that less than 20% of practicing librarians have ever taken an intellectual freedom course. I did not take an intellectual freedom course. It wasn't required. So we have to think about that on the curricular level, right? And then we have to think about, like, even when it comes to lawyers, we work with a lot of lawyers, our Office of Intellectual Freedom, providing technical and legal assistance to libraries and library workers who are experiencing censorship or book banning. And what we find is that lawyers now are having to rebuild their bench because teaching intellectual freedom in law school has kind of slipped. And so now we're starting to see, that need to happen again. So I think education on every level.
Right.
And I also think, beyond the book sanctuary, what ALA has done is that it was the first institution to create a national anti-censorship campaign,
right.
Unite Against Book Bans. And you can go to uniteagainstbookbans.org. We want you to join the tens of thousands of individuals, library practitioners, as well as members of the public and other types of stakeholders who are joining to make sure that we educate our communities. And in your own community, in the neighborhood that I live in Chicago, my neighbors decided to create a banned book club where we would just get together and read. And of course, I start sending, things to like our group list. Oh, how about this book? Or
yeah.
And they're like, wow, you're coming up with some great suggestions. and so we went and we would.
There's a whole long list.
Yeah, a whole long list. And one thing that, finally they were like, yes, and the American Library Association, they're doing all these things with banned books. And then one of my neighbors said, are you? And I was like, don't say anything.
Yeah.
So I want to say that I just joined as a regular member.
Yeah.
And so I haven't been able to make, enough of the meetings. But what I loved is that, especially in the summer, along with food and beverages and children playing along, we were able to talk about some great works of literature and meet and bond. So I think that, that's something else that we can do as library workers and people who care about libraries, is read with each other or read to each other. Let's go back to those days where people gathered together around books.
Yeah, no, that's such a great idea. And I just want to encourage everyone to look at the website for United Against Book Bans. It's an incredible website, and I encourage everyone to join up because they're doing great work. I met Betsy Gomez, and she's just doing fabulous work and so helpful in terms of supporting communities who are and librarians who are facing book bans. Yeah, no, absolutely. So, libraries, you mentioned library schools and teaching intellectual freedom. I know in Canada, there's only one iSchool in Canada that still teaches intellectual freedom, the University of Alberta, and none of the others do. So what can we do to address that, do you think?
Well, I think you're doing something that I, definitely want to call out, is making intellectual freedom courses available to people who are working in libraries. But I would say, first of all, to University of Alberta, thank you.
Yeah, that's right.
Thank you. And, if there is a way that they can get support to scale some of those courses, and so that other university students or library school students can enroll, I think that would be important. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. This is timely.
Yeah.
We're talking about the age of the internet where, you can invite, Harvard and many other schools in the U.S. are inviting members of the public to audit courses online, especially the courses that are about the great ideas. And I want to say right here and right now, I think intellectual freedom is a great idea. It is one of our great ideas, and so much depends on it. And so I think we probably for the next year or two need to really be on certainly a North American campaign, if not a global campaign, to educate everyone, children, adults, grandparents, about intellectual freedom and why it matters so much, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So do you want to talk about maybe resources and organizations that can support libraries? I know ALA, of course, is a huge supporter of it, but maybe you could talk a little bit about the work that you do. You've already done that a bit, but what resources and organizations could you suggest when you're for librarians and library staff who are looking for support?
Yeah, so definitely the Office of Intellectual Freedom at ALA, I think is in the country is considered to be one of the foremost resources on supporting intellectual freedom and freedom of expression. Unite Against Book Bans, Ban Books Week, right? Ban Books Week is coming up in October. Right now we're in National Library Card Sign-Up Month. And so making sure that everyone has access to a library card and restricting, really looking at how we can get away from restrictions and lower barriers to library cards. But for practitioners, I would say to continue to look at your civil liberties organization. Right. I also think it's important for us to look at our faith community. I had an amazing conversation with the director of our Interfaith Alliance in the U.S. because I think that there is a lot of co-opting of this notion that somehow faith communities can't also believe in intellectual freedom, when in fact faith communities are protected by intellectual freedom. So I think reaching out in community. Also, I've straddled arts administration with library administration, and I think it's really important for us to work with our creative communities as well. They're usually under the same pressures when it comes to intellectual freedom. So I would definitely do an asset map and see within your community who are the stakeholders that should care and be engaged in preserving intellectual freedom and pushing back against any type of censorship and book bans. And here you can get to them preemptively. Right now we're having to do a lot of catch up in the U.S. because the pressure is extreme and extraordinary. But I think when I think about Canada, I think that there's some opportunities to get ahead of it. And I would suggest that. So definitely look at what the American Library Association is offering, but also look at, other stakeholders, whatever the adjacencies are to the library in your community, and make sure that those leaders and those stakeholders on a first name basis, because one day you might need to call them and it might be an urgent call.
Right, and United Against Book Bans really helps facilitate that in particular kind of crisis situations, don't they? They really to help you make those connections. We have over 120 partners. Is that right? And and they come from every single walk of life, right? Folks that you would imagine, like some of the major publishers, and maybe others like that you don't like school counselors. Right. And so there's a lot of people who I think care about intellectual freedom, and United Against Book Bans is bringing them all together. Right. Other things, though, that we are working on right now is that we are also working on mutual aid helplines, because some of the librarians who are experiencing a lot of extreme threat need support. They need peer support. Right. And at our conferences, we have also offered free group therapy. So there's access to it. And it has been someone used Twitter to say at our last annual conference in June in Chicago, said, I came to this conference with so much weight on my shoulders of whether or not I should capitulate, because it's really hard. And to be able to have access to someone who could just listen to me and listen to me cry. And talk about it. And so things like that are just as important. So there's all these things I think that can really help us in terms of our work and our practice. But I think we need a lot of support for emotional health, for stress, stress management. Those things are important too. Yeah. And ALA is facing a lot of opposition as an organization as well. I mean, I was Rhea Lawson, who is the CEO of Houston Public Library on our listserv that we share. She was talking about the fact how the state of Texas has indicated that if your library is a member of ALA, then you could lose your state funding because of that. So, and I think there are others, like Montana, I think, has said that they are withdrawing from ALA. So, this must be really such a difficult time for ALA itself in terms of all the great work you're doing and the leadership you're providing on such an important issue.
Yes, I have been saying, to our staff, especially because, you can imagine, what it's like to work at this association, and every day you are in the news, right?
Yeah.
And what I've said is that someday there's going to be a movie written that intellectual freedom and the future of our democracy were being compromised, and this one, library association and its members, fought. Right?
Yes,
because we're like right there in the crosshairs right now, and that's okay.
Yeah.
Because I do think that we will be the victors of that story.
Yes,
right? Because we have too much to lose if not.
Yeah.
As you know, Vickery, I was sharing with you, and I'll share because it's so present upon me. My father just died this week, and I rushed home. He had a stroke, and he just wasn't able to recover from it. But at one point, he was in fits of sleep. He kept trying to wake up, and he said, "I have something to tell you." And then he'd go back to sleep, and he said, "Protection." And I said, "Dad, went back to sleep." But finally, when he was able to get it out, he said, "I'm leaving you some protection." And I said, "Dad, what kind of protection?" And he said, "Our history is your protection." And so I think that our history as a field, our history, the public library, the school library, the academic library, we were founded on this notion of information access.
Yes.
And that information access and knowledge acquisition and the application of that knowledge could lead to self-agency, could lead to national productivity, could lead to a certain type of enlightenment, could lead to social progress. We were founded on that basis, and that history, founded on intellectual freedom, that's our only protection.
Yeah, that's so beautifully said. Absolutely. And, I think what is so important for us to remember is that, core values of public libraries is intellectual freedom and equity.
Right.
Those are foundational to everything that we do. It drives all of our decision making. It drives our strategic plans, our vision, our values, and that we've been a democratizing force. Public libraries have been a democratizing force in the modern world. We support literacy and a literate population, free and open access to a diversity of information and views, as you say, access to information and intellectual freedom and protection of privacy. All so important, preserving the past, as opposed to rewriting the past, which is what is happening as well right now. So it's just, the public library role it becomes so much more important, I think, than it ever has been. And so it's wonderful to be able to have these conversations and to have you here in Toronto. We're so thrilled to have you here.
So happy to be
We're
here.
so honored. And talking about intellectual freedom in such an important and impactful sort of way.
Yes.
So it's wonderful. So I think we're going to be moving to questions from the audience now, both in person here as well as online. So let's move on to that. So we've got one in person here. So that's great. Just getting the microphone over.
Hi. So on the issue of, states and libraries like pulling out of the ALA, however much you can reveal, but I guess what is kind of the broader strategy that the ALA is taking to kind of fight back against that and to get the systems back into the association?
Yeah, thank you. So I think that's a really great question. I think one thing is, one of our strategies is that we will not refuse or restrict service to anyone, to any any librarian, any library practitioner, any state or municipality, we will continue to serve. So that's our immediate plan. I think the other thing is to tell the story of what the American Library Association has been able to do in terms of both advocacy and also material support for states and municipalities, regions, everywhere. The ALA is the second largest grantor of library funds to libraries and library practitioners, scholarships as well to individuals in the country, second behind the Institute of Museum and Library Services. So ALA doesn't only provide an opportunity for people to network and to learn professional development, publishing. We're the accrediting body for librarians in the country. We also provide a lot of funding and a lot of support. You know, I talked about our legal defense fund. So there's very few people in practitioners in the U.S., if they're actively working in libraries, that haven't been impacted either directly or indirectly. So telling that story, because, you know, I can say this very frankly, too many people take it for granted. And so I think that is the second thing. I think the third thing is that we continue to reach out to and to work to mobilize not only the general public, but also major leaders in the country. I think a lot of people are watching what's happening. Particularly, they're watching what's happening to the American Library Association. Not so long ago, we had President Obama talk about United Against Book Bans and how important that is. Just over the weekend, we've had 13 presidential libraries really come forth and say enough is enough. What is happening right now is going to compromise and hurt our democracy if not course corrected. So I think continuing to mobilize individuals and to network. Coming in January, the association will convene about 180 stakeholders, not just in the library field, but in every part of the public realm, leaders for a summit on intellectual freedom, which will be only the third that we've ever had in the history of the association, which is now almost 150 years old. It will be held at the Library of Congress because we felt that we needed to hold it at the Library of Congress to demonstrate that intellectual freedom is foundational to the health of our society. And so convenings, programs, trainings, rethinking the curriculum, and of course engaging the public, especially this Banned Books Week, we have some extraordinary work that is being planned, and you know, and using every platform we have to talk about it. I mean, in fact, I think some of the pushback in some ways is really, I think, bringing a lot of attention to the association. And though we're getting a lot of pushback, like in terms of very conservative press, we're also hearing from many who care about intellectual freedom, we see you, we see the work you're doing, and we stand with you.
Isn't that wonderful?
Yes, it is, and it's needed.
It is needed, for sure.
Needed.
Yeah.
I have a question here from a member of our online audience, our top voted question from Megan. Fighting against censorship as it pertains to work that represents marginalized populations makes sense. But what are your thoughts on providing access to books that may be polarizing because they perpetrate harm or hate? Should libraries always fulfill requests from the community, or are there times where we must use discretion with what we include in our collections? And I imagine that's for both Vickery and Tracie.
Yeah. Well, I always say you can't pick and choose when to support intellectual freedom and free speech and free expression. Because you're making a judgment call, and what one person will find offensive, another person won't find offensive. And so if you look at what's happening now with all of the attacks on the LGBTQ plus community and the racialized communities, the attacks on drag queen story times, and we've experienced that here in Toronto, as other Canadian libraries have as well, that you really, you have to stand up for both sides, different points of view, in order to stand up for all points of view. And so it's really important to, and sometimes you can be in really uncomfortable situations supporting intellectual freedom and free speech, because the free speech that you're supporting is not mainstream. It's not supported by the majority of people. But, you know, in a democracy, everyone has a right to their opinion and to speak freely about it. And it's like the ALA wonderful slogan, free people read freely. You can't pick and choose when to support free speech. You cannot pick and choose what to have in your collection and say, oh, well, we won't have this body of information in our collection, but we will have this body of information. That's censorship, and you just can't support censorship if you support democratic values and freedoms.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think you said it, you know, well. I think if anything, what libraries, you know, should take the opportunity to do is to be places where people can safely debate.
Yes.
Their ideas. I mean, that, you know, that's also part of our origin story. So I think you said it, you know, very well. But like, I think take the opportunity to create places for civic dialogue.
Yes.
Because those places are also fleeting, you know.
They are.
I've heard from so many that that's what's missing, is a safe place to disagree.
Well, and that's absolutely true. And I think that the public library is a safe place to disagree. And we've actually created an On Civil Society series where we've asked people to get out of your bubble and to and hear different ideas from different people and have a civil and respectful discussion about it in a safe place where all points of view are respected and heard, and people, you know, can not change their minds but the wonderful thing in a democracy is that if you disagree with someone or something, or with your government and what they have to say, you have the ability to speak up against it. You can civilly protest against it. And so if you start to take away that ability for some ideas or some groups of people, then you're undermining the whole foundational principles of free speech and free expression.
Absolutely. I have a little story that I always think about when, you know, people talk about, oh, you know, books make, you know, this book might make me uncomfortable, you know, shouldn't it be censored and that kind of thing, or it might hurt my feelings. I remember one time, this is way back when I was at Seattle Public Library doing youth and young adult services, and part of our summer reading program, we had a summer movie series, and which parents, we could approximate, because sometimes it would be kind of rainy or whatever. You could approximate going to like a drive-in theater. So in the afternoon, parents could bring their children, or caregivers could bring, children, and everybody would kind of camp out and could eat. And it was in the auditorium. It was really fun. And one of the films that we showed was Pink and Say, you know, I think Virginia Polacco, about another aspect of censorship, you know, which is very early in the U.S. as a part of, you know, enslavement, is enslaved Africans were not allowed to read or to learn to read. Right. And so this book is talking about the Civil War, and one protagonist is a young white boy and the other is a young black boy, and it is revealed that the young black boy doesn't know how to read. So they befriended each other, and they get to a point where they're trying to read something, and so, you know, you see the film. So afterwards, you know, each child could ask questions, right? So, and you know, kids, they're not going to let go. So we get this kid, you know, one little girl, she's like, how come, you know, he couldn't read? And so I said, oh, and then it was all the kids.
Yeah.
You know, they were indignant, right? Like, what do you mean he wasn't allowed to read? And I remember the parents at first, there was like fear in their eyes. Yeah. Right? Like, oh, and then the kids started to reason, well, that's not fair.
No,
that's right. Well, I know how to read. Me too. I'm learning to read. And in our school, everybody can read. And they worked it out. Yeah. What they realized is that this was something that they held in common, that they felt was wrong. Right. And they were in experiences right now in their schools where everybody was learning to read. And I think the parents, you know, they got relieved, but they needed that space to talk about that. Yeah. That was something that they saw as like a human rights violation. Yes. And they were able to talk about it. That's what we need to happen for our young people, because that kind of reading, it builds empathy. Yeah. It builds awareness, you know, all of those things.
Well, and it builds tolerance.
Yes.
You know,
yes,
and that's part of what debate and discussion about controversial ideas does, is it brings those ideas to light, and people come to hear the debate and hear the discussion, and it builds tolerance and understanding. And I always say that, you know, equity-deserving groups would never have achieved what they've been able to achieve in today's world if there wasn't for the fact that their voices were protected with free speech and free expression.
Yes, yes, yes.
Hello. So in the past few years, we've seen, for example, the Open Library Project from the Internet Archive, which had provided books to folks online when libraries were closed over the pandemic. We've also seen some library systems opening up their collections to people in areas that might have stronger censorship in their systems. Yeah. So I was wondering if you could speculate how digital lending might evolve in the future and contribute to freedom of information and accessibility.
Mm-hmm. How?
Digital lending.
The controlled digital lending, is that what you're referring to?
Yeah. No, it's great. First of all, thank you for bringing up some of those projects. I was recently talking to the Linda and Tom, the executive directors or chief librarians, respectively, of Brooklyn Public Library and Seattle Public Library, you know, where, you know, the sort of opening up collections to especially teens across the country, young people and teens across the country where books have been censored, understanding like the gravity. I think we have so many opportunities there, right? And I think we have to, first of all, information wants to be free. And I think one thing that I'd like to see as sort of like the base of that, and the American Library Association has also talked a lot about this, is that I think it'll be important for us to move to universally fee-free internet. So I believe definitely in universal broadband, because too much depends on it. But I also believe, you know, as part of that, we should continue to see some of the conversations at ALA that we're having right now is how can we open up more of our collections, but still make sure that collections are supported and paid for. Because I think the other thing that, you know, we're up against sometimes is that libraries, let's face it, they're not funded at the level that they should be today. They just aren't, not for the work that we do, ounce for ounce, pound for pound. I believe that the project of public education is actually happening in libraries. When I was at Queens Library, we were the second largest provider of adult basic education in the entire state. Not in the city, but in the state.
Yeah.
One library. And I know that TPL, you know, you are providing a lot of access on the same scale. So I think that we need to continue to do this work, but I also think we need to have an expanded funding model for libraries so that we can do this work and do it well. Obviously, you know, digital access is an accelerant, and we need to eliminate the broadbands to digital access. We still have about 20% of the population, at least in the US, who are not online at all, and there's a lot of root causes for that. I live in a community in Chicago where 45% of residents don't have access to a device or to broadband or both. And so I think that there's a lot of promise, but I think we have to eliminate a lot of the barriers too so it can be equitable.
I have a question here and this will be our last question as we're running out of time. Again, to both Vickery and Tracie, how do you see libraries maintaining their autonomy in places where legislation at the city or provincial, state, federal level can dictate library policy or funding? For example, some places in the States have defunded their libraries to the point where they had to close down if they refused to give in to banning demands.
Well, I'll just say in Ontario and provinces in Canada, we have provincial legislation that really, really protects us. I'll speak for Ontario. The Public Libraries Act protects us in terms of the role of the library, the role of a library board in establishing policy, strategic plans, hiring the city librarian or the CEO, and firing the CEO. So it's not a different body. It's not your city council. And there's an arm's length relationship between City Hall and the Public Library through the Library Board, and the majority of members of the Library Board have to be citizen members. They can't be politicians. So that is a wonderful model for us in terms of protection. It also speaks to, what we can charge for or not charge for. So free public library service is embedded in the legislation. So we're very fortunate here. But we do get our funding through City Hall. There's no question. Over 90%, 95% of our funding comes from the City of Toronto. But there has been this long history of a relationship with where there's understanding that the City Hall doesn't dictate policy and or the strategic plans of the library. And so we're in a touch wood, we're some wood. We're in a really fortunate situation here in Toronto and in Ontario where we have that kind of protection against those kinds of situations. But that's not always the case in the United States.
Yeah, and what I was thinking about? I was thinking about 10 years ago, the number of libraries that are under attack that would have said just the same thing that you said now.
Yeah.
Right? So
it can change.
It doesn't change until it changes. When it changes, it's changed.
It's changed,
right?
Yeah.
And so I think to be preemptive, there's a lot of things that I want to answer to that. I think one thing is like education, continuously educating and learning from the public, creating safe places for debate, having really good and solid relationships with legislators and with lawmakers, with influencers, with stewards, with philanthropists. And when I use the word influencer, I'm not just talking necessarily about social media, although I'm not disregarding social media. I'm talking about the people who are the tastemakers in community. They need to also be advocating for the library. But one thing that I want to say is something, I was having a conversation with Peter Coyle, who's executive director of the Sacramento Public Library. And we were talking about how we got to this place in intellectual freedom. And he said, what we really need to restore? And I said, what? He said, it's adult services in libraries. He said, right now we focus so much on youth and children, sometimes older adults, hopefully people with disabilities, et cetera. But we also, in all of that, we also need to focus on adult services because too often you don't see an adult until maybe they're coming back to the library because they have children, especially when we talk about public libraries.
That's true.
But we have so many people who want some point of connection. So beginning to do more work, more robust work around the arts and humanities, bringing people together who might be sometimes looking for friends, looking for support, looking for a network, doing that at the library like we've done in the past. I remember when I was at Seattle Public Library and also when I was at Hartford Public Library, I managed a branch that had the lowest circulation and door count of any of the other branches at Hartford Public Library. I was not yet 30, and so I needed to have, I was an artist and poet, and I started looking at the people in the community and starting to have them show their work and do poetry readings and also opportunities to meet each other. We would have all kinds of programs, movement-based programs in the library. And in addition to working with children and the elders, we were able to increase our circulation within 2 years by almost 200%.
Wow.
But it was written about in the Hartford Current because I didn't know this, but a reporter would come into who was on a neighborhood beat would come into the library and basically said that they saw it transform from like the Bad News Bears until into this library, and of course we had so many people coming there. We had 2 legislators who kicked off their campaigns there because it went from being the least desirable place to the place to be. And I would say for libraries, let's court adults so that we're not just beholden to the legislators. Let's let the legislators be beholden to the people who support and believe that libraries are indispensable to their communities. And I think that's a lot of adults who sometimes now are advocating for libraries because we're in this intellectual freedom crisis in the U.S. But I think we really need to go on a campaign to win the hearts and minds once again of adults in this community who can understand that Toronto Public Library, that wherever your library is in Canada or the US, that is really the treasure of your community, because I wholeheartedly believe that.
Well, what a great note to end this on. Thank you so much, Tracie, for a wonderful conversation about intellectual freedom and all the tremendous leadership and work that you are doing and advocating for it. And thank you. Oh my goodness, my favorite saying of all time.
We've been talking about people. We've been talking about people of color and GLBTQIA communities that are really under assault, especially with intellectual freedom. And so this bag really unites both of those communities and makes us understand why we're fighting as hard as we're fighting. So I want to give that to you, who you are a fighter.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you. I will carry this bag with pride and always think of you when I have it with me. So thank you so much, Tracie. And thank you to everyone online and here in the audience in person. It was wonderful to have all of you here today. And thank you for being here. It's made a great program. And thank you, lastly, to Tracie for your tremendous work. Thank you so much.